Okay, follow along with me, please, as I read from Luke's Gospel in chapter 1. And I'm going to start to read right in verse 5. Luke 1, in verse 5. In the time of Herod, king of Judea. Let's pause there. This Herod is a very interesting character. This is Herod the Great. All right, and just to kind of give you an idea of our time frame here, Herod the Great, approximately from 74 to 4 BC. Now remember, we are counting back to the birth of Christ. So Herod the Great was born around 74 and lived till 4 BC. So we know that this story is probably happening somewhere around closer to 4 BC. He reigned in southern Israel in Judea from 37 BC to 4 BC. He was a very interesting character. He was half Jewish and half Arab. He was kind of like, if you could picture this in your mind, he was the Donald Trump of his day. He was a politician, and he was a builder. He built a beautiful seaport in Caesarea that we saw. And you can still see one of because they laid these massive stones out into the water in the Mediterranean Sea. In the one arm, you can still see to this day in that seaport. He built amphitheaters for entertainment. He built Masada, this fortress. It's an engineering marvel. I encourage you sometime, Google Masada, Israel. That's M-A-S-A-D-A, Masada, Israel. It's an engineering marvel. It's in southern Israel. It's on top of a mountain. And when I tell you that the face, the cliffs of this mountain are almost like this. How they got all the material up that mountain, I do not know. And his engineers and his architects, it's like they just, machined the top of that mountain. They excavated it with these primitive tools. They excavated it. It was almost flat. And then the one side they cut down like this, and they cut it this way here, and they put a pole over there. And they cut it down here, and they cut it again. And there was a banqueting hall there. It's an engineering marvel, Masada. And then at the top of this mountain, there was a fortified wall that went all the way around it. And so he was very paranoid because he always thought someone was trying to kill him. So he killed wives of his, he killed children of his because they always thought they were plotting against him. How'd you like to be married to this guy? So this is Herod the Great. This is the same guy that when Jesus was born, that he ordered all the children in Bethlehem to be killed from age 2 years and under. Herod the Great. Okay, so and what made him such a great politician was that he was able to get along with the Roman government and appease them. And then he was also able to get along with the Jewish people and appease them because he built a great temple. This was the temple in Jesus' day, which I think they said was about 9 stories high. It was this beautiful building that the temple that Herod the Great built for the Jews. So this is the Herod we're talking about right here. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. Here's a very interesting meaning of his name. Zechariah. In Hebrew, the meaning of his name is the Lord remembers. Think about it. The Lord remembers. He belonged to the priestly division of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. So these were 2 very special people because they both were descendants of Aaron, and Aaron, if you remember, was the brother of Moses. This was the priestly line of Aaron. So Zechariah and Elizabeth were both from the lineage of Aaron. And they were the priestly division of Abijah. Now here's what's important that we have to understand about this. Back in the time of King David, there's these hundreds and thousands of priests. So David, he divided all these priests into 24 categories. Okay, so Zechariah is in the category of the division of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Look at verse 6. Both of them were upright in the sight of God. They were righteous, observing all the Lord's commandments and regulations blamelessly. These were good people. They were godly people. They were righteous people. These were people that prayed, and in their life they tried their best to honor God in their life and keep God's commandments. They were good people. They were godly people, God-fearing people, Zechariah and Elizabeth. Well, in our story, so far, so good. Almost kind of wish I could put the period right there. But our story continues, and right at this place right here, our story takes an interesting twist. They were righteous people. Verse 7, but they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well along in years. You know, church, there's a point I want you to see about this here. Yes, sometimes in life, bad things happen to godly people. Back in Bible days, having children was a sign of God's blessing on your marriage, on your life, and your family. Psalm 127 talks about how children are a gift from God. Most of the times. All the time. Even though sometimes they take us right to the edge at times. Children are a gift from God. They're a sign of God's blessing on your life. And back in Bible days, if you were not able to have children, it was a social stigma. It was a mark of disgrace upon your life. And you know how people talk, especially in a small town. Wonder what they did. Why is God punishing them with not having any children? Why is Elizabeth barren? So their whole lives they lived with this social stigma, this mark of disgrace of being barren. Friends, there's some things in life that are just hard to understand. I'll be honest with you, I can't explain it. Why sometimes bad things happen to good people and godly people that love God, that are serving God, and sometimes bad things happen to them. It's a hard thing to understand. And sometimes we ask ourselves, Lord, why? Why did this happen? When we know that God is all loving, God is in control of everything in the world. He's in control. And if God is all powerful and if He's all loving, then why did He allow this to happen? I can't answer that. I've told you this before. I have a news feed on my phone that every day I just get all the latest latest news, both local news and world news on my phone. I like to know what's going on in the community and around the world. And just when you think that you have been shocked beyond the ability to be shocked anymore, how can one human being possibly do something like this to another human being is beyond comprehension. Just when you think that you've been shocked beyond the ability to be shocked anymore, you come across something in the news and you just shake your head and you say, dear God, what that poor person had to go through. And you might say, why? Why did God allow that to happen? If He's all loving, if He's all powerful, if God controls all the events in the world, why does He allow evil in the world? Why does He allow bad things to happen to good people and even godly people? Well, friends, I can say this. Number one, God, that was never His plan. That was never His intention. When God created Adam and Eve and put them in the Garden of Paradise, it was His will that there be righteousness and that Adam and Eve walk in righteousness and that there would be love, joy, and peace in paradise in God's presence. Well, there was a simple test there which they failed, and because of our first parents' disobedience, that brought sin into the world. That's why when you're walking outside and you're in the woods and you run into some jaggers, that's part of the curse on the world because of man's sin. The water we drink is contaminated. The air that we breathe is polluted. The food that we eat is contaminated. It's all because of sin in the world. Dear friends, we live in a dark and evil world. And if you're not sure of that, pick up a newspaper today and read it, or watch today's news. We live in a dark world. As a matter of fact, the Bible says that Satan is the god of this world, small g. That's why the world is so corrupt. I'll say this while I'm on this. Life is not fair. If you are looking for fairness to be in the world all the time, you're going to be disappointed. Life isn't always fair. People get sick. Christians get sick. Pastors get sick. And people die. These bodies in which we live, friends, in this life are not designed to live forever. Have you figured that out yet? Like the old guy said, the older I get, the more I'm starting to realize that and understand that. These bodies are not built to live forever. And we do get sick. And people get sick, people die, even Christians, people that you pray for. When you pray for someone, for them to get healed and they die, listen, it's not that God didn't hear your prayer, didn't answer. He gave you the best answer of all, and that's ultimate healing. When our soul and our spirit comes out of our body and goes into the presence of God, friends, that's the ultimate healing, to be in God's presence. So here we have them, these two beautiful people, these two godly people, but they carry in their hearts a personal and private pain. Dick, I don't mean to put you on the spot here again, but I was thinking about this right here. I was thinking about you when I was preparing this message. Beautiful man of God, loves Jesus, humble. And in his younger years, already went through hell in his younger years in the first accident. And here he is, as an older man, got into an accident that almost killed him. And his life will probably never be the same as it was before. due to that accident. God, why? These things, friends, are hard to understand. And I think in this life, we're not going to have all the answers in this life. It was the Apostle Paul that said, in this life, he said, I see as in a mirror dimly. Because back in those days, their mirrors were not like the nice mirrors we have today. They were like a polished piece of brass. And even that, you probably got a decent reflection, but it wasn't perfect. So in this life, friends, we're not going to see perfectly, we're not going to understand perfectly everything that happens to us in this life. Perhaps one day in God's presence, He'll help us to understand things better by and by. I've used this illustration before for the women that do cross-stitch and embroidery. And when you look down from the top, you see a beautiful picture that's being stitched. But when you look underneath it, all you see are the knots and the strings. And for us, that's the way it is for us in life. Right now, all you're seeing is the knots and the strings. But God, when He's looking down from on high, He sees the beautiful picture that you and I can't see that's being stitched in your life. We can't see it, friends. But God can see it. Here's what we know for sure. That God's love is unconditional. His mercies are fresh and new every morning, and great is His faithfulness. His ways are perfect beyond finding out. We don't always understand His ways, but the Bible tells us they are perfect. And friends, we have this promise in Romans 8:28 that all things, good things and bad things, will work together for the good, for those who love God, for those who are all called according to His purpose. And you look at some of the terrible things that happen in life, friends, and you say, how can God bring anything good out of this? Sometimes it takes time. I've told you this story many times about my family. My mother passed away in 1965. She was 42 years old of a terrible disease, myasthenia gravis, that is similar to MS. Horrible disease. My father was 42. They had 5 children. I was the youngest. I was 7. My sister Joanne was 18. I told you that my mother passed away the day before my oldest sister Joanne was to get married. For many years, my father had a real problem with God. Don't even mention His name. Why are you picking on me? Why me? And my father carried that in his heart for many years. From 1965 to 1976. Took God some time. And He brought a beautiful Christian woman into my father's life, and we all came to Christ through that. And I'm called into ministry. My sister Joanne is called into ministry. All our family is serving the Lord. And friends, God only knows if we would be where we're at today in God, if my mom had not had passed away. Sometimes you don't see it in an instant. You don't see it in a moment. Sometimes it takes time for God to work His grace in our pain. But here's the point I want to make through all of this. Please listen to me. We have to trust God, even with our pain. We trust Him in life in so many different ways, friends, but we have to trust God with our pain also. You can be going through the worst in life right now, and that still small voice of God will speak to your heart and say this: do you still trust me? Do you still trust me? We have to trust God with our pain also in life. Beverly and I are one of the verses that we love. It's our life verse in Scripture, in Proverbs 3. Verse 5 and 6 that says this: trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean to your own understanding. Don't try and figure this out, because you won't be able to. Acknowledge the Lord in all your ways, and He'll make your path straight. He will direct thy paths. All right, let's continue. We said how they were both well along in years. Both well along in years. I remember when I was young, maybe around 10. I was over at my friend's house. We were in the backyard. We were playing, and he said that he told me that it was his father's birthday. He was 35 years old. Now, when you're 10, I thought 35 was ancient. I thought 35 was really old. You know, when you're a young kid. How long does it take to be well along in years? When you get in your 40s? Your 50s?
Keep going.
Keep going, Marilyn says. 60s? You know what's funny? The older I get, the higher that number gets. 70s? 80s? My dad was 93. But they were well along in years. Why in the world would God pick Zechariah and Elizabeth to bring John the Baptist, the forerunner of Christ, into the world? Could have been a young, handsome couple like Bo and Robin. But he chose two elderly, I was going to say old fogies, but we'll say it nice, elderly people, Zechariah and Elizabeth. They were well along in years. I guess for the miracle, huh? This miraculous birth. You know, friends, here's something I've discovered in life. Look at our slide. Sometimes God picks from the back of the line. You talk about people that had all the strikes and all the odds against them. Elizabeth was barren. There's a huge obstacle right there. They were well along in years. That's another big obstacle right there. Sometimes God doesn't always pick the way we would pick. I think about King David. When they were looking for, a king to replace Saul. And they said, well, go to, I forget what was David's father's name? Anybody remember?
Jesse.
Thank you.
Yeah.
God tells Samuel, go to the house of Jesse. So Samuel, he goes, and he says, bring all your sons out. And there's Eliab. Boy, he was tall and handsome and good looking, and Samuel's thinking to himself, surely this is the Lord's anointed. And God said, nope, not him. Especially not him. I don't like his attitude. So he lines up all of his brothers, and Samuel goes, nope, not him, not him, not him, not him, not him. Well, we have one other son, but he's just only a boy. And he's out with tending the sheep. Samuel says, go get him. And they bring David in. He says, anoint him as king. Sometimes, friends, God picks from the back of the line. Doesn't always choose like the way man chooses. You may be thinking to yourself today, I have a lot of obstacles in my life. How in the world can I serve God? I have some big obstacles in my life. Sometimes God picks from the back of the line. He doesn't always choose. He knows the heart of a person. Man looks on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. Okay, and here, you may have, you can have all the strikes against you, all the odds against you, and God can still do a great thing through you if you just yield your life to Him. All right, let's continue. So once Zechariah's division was on duty, he was serving as priest before God. Now, he was chosen by lot. Think about this. There was thousands of priests back in this day. And there was 24 divisions, and every division served in the temple 2 times a year for a week at a time to burn incense. Think about it. Your division had 2 opportunities during the year for 1 week at a time to burn incense during the time of prayer. There were so many priests. You could live your whole life and never be chosen by lot to go burn incense in the temple. And this lot was not like drawing straws. They had like these dice that were called the Urim and Thummim. They were kind of like dice, and somehow they used these dice to determine God's will. And through the rolling of these dice, the casting of these lots, it fell on Zechariah to go and burn incense during the time of prayer. There was 3 times a day when God's people would assemble together for prayer. They prayed in the morning, they prayed at noon, they prayed in the evening. I don't know what time of the day this was. But it was the time of prayer. So, because Zechariah was chosen by lot, he goes into the temple, the temple to burn incense. So all of God's people are on the outside of the temple. They've gathered together to prayer during the time of prayer. And so the significance of the burning of incense, it was a sweet-smelling, fragrant incense. And while the people prayed and the priest burned that